No, this isn't a joke. It's real. About as real as you can get. Real enough for screaming nightmares about the things you've seen and done. Because sometimes the stuff you see in the movies, the stuff you thought could never ever happen to you, well, it can happen. It does happen. I've seen it. Oh, please tell me that the movie in which the things actually do happen is the Muppet movie. Oh, with the banjo playing frog and the bear stand-up comedian and a pig winning a county fair beauty contest and Steve Martin being a shitty waiter and I could hang out with Dr. Teeth and oh my god, that'd be awesome.
Shows us all the places that we want to go and look. Superbook, Superbook.
Welcome everyone to Alternate Reality Autumn. The next 3 reviews feature Animorph stories that take place outside of the normal Animorphs universe, either through messing with the space-time continuum, alien simulations of what-if scenarios, or, in this case, non-canon game books that rewrite canon books to feature your stupid butt. Yes, Alternamorphs, the Animorphs choose-your-own-adventure books. You thought I forgot about those, didn't you? You thought I was going to skip them entirely, didn't you? Well, here we are. I will admit, figuring out how I was going to talk about these 2 books was a challenge I had to solve very early in the life of the Opinionated Animorphs book guide. Considering how little content there actually is in these books, how unimportant they are to Animorphs as a whole, and how complicated it would be to talk about a choose-your-own-adventure book twice, the first decision I made was to review both books together so I wouldn't be repeating myself over and over again. Then I had to choose when in the project to review them. I try to review everything in publication order. Alternamorphs number 1, The First Journey, was published in March of 1999, which would have put its review between number 28, The Experiment, and number 29, The Sickness. And I figured it'd be better for the heart if I followed the shitty meat is murder but not really book with one that wasn't actually shit. Then I realized if I did this when Alternamorphs number 2, The Next Passage was published, March of 2000, then I could do a alternate reality theme season. Patience is rewarded with gimmicks. So with those big decisions out of the way, the next decision was how do I even review these things? I've never reviewed a choose-your-own-adventure book before. Every time the Goosebumps Halloween Annual comes around, I always make sure to leave a no give yourself Goosebumps books as a ground rule. So this is a clearly new territory for me. Let me first say that neither of these books will be getting the traditional number score. They're so out of the normal wheelhouse for this review series that I wouldn't know what to score them anyway. I can only address their quality in relation to each other and other game books. So let me just say up front that neither of these are required reading for Animorphs. You are not missing anything in skipping them, and not just because they are the only books in the series that are non-canon. Like a lot of the Animorphs merchandise and spin-off material, they're both just kinda lame, but in remarkably different ways. But taking away the number score doesn't get us any closer to actually talking about these things. I spent months racking my brain for ways to approach this project, and to tell you the truth, I'm stumped. There's a couple of ways I could do this, but I don't know which is the right way. Which way will do the subject matter justice? So, with the gimmick you probably saw coming a mile away, I mean, come on, look at how short this video is, I'm going to have you help me form this review. The first thing we could do is just get on with it and jump into the plot of the first Alternamorphs book. If you come here for the sarcasm and nitpicking, click option A. Oh, make sure you have annotations on. The next possibility is that I could take a look at the big picture by looking at the history of choose-your-own-adventure books and the various literary advantages and disadvantages of the format. If you watch my videos for the pretentious histrionics and research, click option B. But you know what? We both know these books are non-canon. We both know they suck. We both know they are entirely disposable. Maybe we should just forget this and talk about something way more interesting, like, I don't know, early 20th century revolutionary theory filtered through geographical awareness as defined by French Marxist Guy Debord. If you want to learn a bit about psychogeography, click option C. Option D was going to be a dance party, but Andrew WK isn't returning my calls, so sorry guys. A, B, or C. You must choose. I cannot go forward without you. The main selling point of an Animorphs Choose Your Own Adventure book is the feeling of being a substantial part of the Animorphs. Many readers read the original books and wonder to themselves what they would do if they had morphing powers, if they were fighting the Yeerks, if they were part of the team. Some of those people wrote self-insert fan fiction. Some try to capture that feeling by playing crappy Animorphs video games. And then here comes a product specifically designed to rewrite Animorphs with you as a character within it. Yes, you. Be you boy or girl. Be you white or black or Asian or Middle Eastern or of any race or nationality. Be you straight or gay. Be you tall or short. Be you thin or fat. Be you Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or atheist or of any other religious creed. The book accommodates for any variance of the human condition. Except for one. Whether or not you love extreme sports. Woo! Tony Hawk! The X Games! Let's grind some bikes! Woo! The book opens with you riding your bike through the construction site, doing tricks off makeshift ramps. You're not friends with any of the Animorphs. You're not walking through the construction site with them. You just also happen to be there, doing stunts on private property. The number of kids in wheelchairs who got pissed off at this book must have been through the roof. The first half of this book is basically a retelling of number 1, The Invasion. As you're playing around, you spot Jake, Rachel, Marco, Cassie, and Tobias taking a shortcut. You don't know them too well, so you don't approach them, but then Elfangor's ship lands. It's a UFO. You know it. And it isn't because you watch the X-Files. It's because every hair on your head is standing up on end. Is that really the conclusive evidence of a UFO? Hair standing on end? When a girl pulls off a staticky sweater, is there usually a rush to panic that maybe aliens are nearby? I think the main evidence of this being a UFO should probably be, I don't know, the fact that it's a UFO! You keep yourself hidden for a while, watching the rest of the Animorphs reenact the encounter with Elfangor, and you might start to wonder if you'll ever get involved with the events until Elfangor finally spots you and brings you in to warn you about the Yeerks. Now, you think the first choice you make in this book would be whether or not you accept the morphing powers, but nope, you just do it. Fine, whatever. Then the Yeerks land and you hide with the rest of the group as Visor 3 murders and consumes Elfangor. So your first choice probably has to do with escaping the construction site, right? Nope, you just make a run for it, throwing a bit of debris to lure away some Hork-Bajir like you're playing The Last of Us or something. You make it back home and go to sleep, waking up the next day thinking it was all a dream. It's here that you're introduced to your fictional family. Families that in no way resemble yours is a common enough thing in these choose-your-own-adventure books to the point where you just kind of have to roll with it, and I'll certainly take it over the book assuming you're an extreme sports junkie. In any case, you appear to live with your mom and your little sister Lexi, and today is her 6th birthday. But something feels a bit off when your mom tells you that instead of making a birthday cake like usual, she's going to get one from the store. Dun dun dun. That's when Marco shows up. So it wasn't a bad dream, you mutter. Not only that, it gets worse, Marco tells you. While you've been snoring, we've been morphing. You stare at him. No way. Way, he says, tossing his longest hair behind his shoulder. I have been designated by our fearless leader, Jake, to recruit you. So far today, Tobias has turned into a cat, Jake into the family dog, and Cassie into a truly awesome horse. I don't believe you, you say. Yeah, I didn't want to believe it either, Marco says, shrugging, considering that I'd like to remain alive long enough to get into an R-rated movie. But apparently everything that Prince Alpha Diddle told us is true, which means we're all in big trouble. You mean there might be controllers around? You whisper. Closer than you think, Marco says, reaching for a banana, like Jake's brother. When I told Jake I thought Tom was a controller, he went postal. I have the jaw to prove it. Marco rubs his chin. But it's the little things you notice. Tom just hasn't been acting like Tom, and he goes to this meeting called the Sharing. It sounds totally bogus, but we're all going tonight. Jake says you should come too. So if all that stuff has happened so far, that means you slept in till, about 4 in the afternoon, I think. Ever wish you could sleep through an Animorphs book? With Alternamorphs, now you can. Live the dream. Also, Marco calling Elfangor Elfadiddle? I guess you being part of the Animorphs universe turned on Marco's asshole switch. That also kind of happened when David joined. Marco's just got some serious 6th Animorph issue that he has to work out with his therapist. Okay, so now it's finally time to make a choice. You have to decide which animal will be your first morph. By yourself. Yeah, Marco just leaves and you have to go about morphing unsupervised. Your 3 choices are a fly, your sister's pet hamster, or, and I love this, the pet ferret belonging to your crazy next-door neighbor. Now, a fly seems like a horrible idea for a first morph, and indeed, if you choose it, you immediately fly into a bug zapper that the book failed to mention before. But then again, I'm not entirely sure the author even knows what a fly is. Spider! You want it. You want to eat it. Chomp down on that plump, juicy body and... No, your mind screams. Focus. The spider probably has a web, and you don't want to get caught. You have a mission. What bizarro universe are we in where houseflies are the natural predator to spiders and have jaws that are capable of chomping? The only way this makes sense is that Book U likes to eat spiders as a person and are having to keep bad habits in check while as a fly. So if you've been keeping track, you love BMX, you sleep 18 hours a day, and you enjoy picking spiders off the wall and eating them. You may or may not be a distant cousin of the Addams family. Okay, so fly is a no-go, and now the 2 remaining options, the hamster is easier to get to, so let's try that. Wrong. Somehow you get outside, only to be immediately attacked by the neighbor's cat, which again, the book failed to mention beforehand. You know, in the introduction, the book tells you you have to make your choices very carefully. Think them through. That's a touch difficult if you are denying the reader crucial information like this. So yeah, the correct choice was to somehow break into your neighbor's house and morph her pet ferret, because that is a carefully considered decision. You play around a bit before getting scooped up by the neighbor, put in a bag, and get taken to the beach. It turns out the neighbor is a controller and needs to keep up appearances of being a crazy pet lady while attending the sharing meeting. The rest of the Animorphs are already there, and you manage to get Cassie to free you before your 2 hours are up. So by now you might be thinking one of 2 things. If you're thinking, wow, you sure don't seem to be interacting with the Animorphs that much, then click the sweet, delicious spider and we'll see just how big of a problem that is. If instead you're thinking, wow, which of the ghostwriters wrote this crap, then might I suggest you click the totally awesome mountain bike. You can only have one. Merry Christmas! The actual term we should be using is gamebook. Choose Your Own Adventures has become a popular term for these kind of books, but much like Band-Aids and Jell-O, Choose Your Own Adventure is a brand name that became the popular umbrella name for all these game books. I'm going to try and keep that distinction clear for this path. In the other paths, all bets are off. What's probably the most interesting thing about game books is how young of a concept it actually is. For as old as books and printing is, the first game books didn't hit the scene until the 1960s, during a period of significant literary experimentation. If you saw my video on the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, you'll remember how we have a very different attitude towards oral history and printed works. While oral history thrived on being mutable and ever-changing, we treat books as definitive, set in stone. The idea of a story that changes based on decisions of the reader was probably as inconceivable as images sent through the air. The actual format that would define the game book actually came from interactive textbooks from the 1950s, part of a system called programmed learning. The idea was that the books would teach the reader something, ask the reader a question, and they would flip to the page that they thought contained the right answer. If wrong, they were told why it was wrong, and then they had to go back. And if right, they'd move on to the next lesson. At virtually the same time around the world, people were picking up on this format and they were applying it to fiction. In France, during a creative period when all sorts of young people were forming experimental, artistic, or revolutionary groups like the New Wave or Situationist International, there was a literary group called Oulipo which combined writing with mathematics to come up with new structures in order to force creativity around them. Naturally, this textbook format appealed to them, and they used it in some of their works, calling the idea tree literature. Seriously, everyone was picking up on this at the same time, and series of gamebooks started cropping up in the 1970s, with things like The Tracker and The Adventures of You. Finally, in 1979, Choose Your Own Adventures debuted with The Cave of Time, an incredibly surreal adventure that throws the reader every which way through time and space. You could end up a slave building the Great Wall of China, brushing shoulders with Lincoln, and hanging around the 38th century. At one point, you come across a powerful wizard-looking man who bears more than a passing resemblance to a certain all-powerful jerk-face. Choose Your Own Adventure solidified the style in which game books work. A story starts, and on the bottom of each page, there is instructions to turn to another one. Eventually, you come across a choice, and what you decide dictates which page you go to next. You keep doing this until you reach an ending, the number of which in the original Choose Your Own Adventure series ranged from 12 to over 40. Choose Your Own Adventures also popularized the idea of the reader playing the role of the protagonist, being written in second person and in present tense to allow for effective role-playing. Sometimes the reader would be playing a role that doesn't reflect their real life, like a spy or an athlete or something, but kept things vague enough for anyone to take up that role. Until you see the illustrations, which I always kind of thought were the series' weak point, because they would illustrate your character within the book, and it never ever looked like you. Alright, let's take a ride on the reality machine. I always wanted to use a reality machine, and... oh... I guess I'm a white blonde male. I'm not blonde, but imagine how disappointed I'd be if I was black, or a woman. Choose Your Own Adventure tended for more pulpy genre adventures, and they were usually pretty hilarious in how campy they were. We've got things like Vampire Express, War with the Evil Power Master, Volcano! You are a monster! Alien, go home! You're drunk! And my personal favorite, the Power Dome. So with that set up, we can jump into Alternamorphs and see how they implement these ideas into their own series, what they bring to the table, and what they got wrong. If that sounds like a good idea, click the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. If you would like to take a broader look at how franchises have used the gamebook format, we could do that too. I'll probably talk about the Goosebumps stuff. Y'all seem to like the Goosebumps stuff. If so, click the other Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. Don't worry, there's no wrong way to click a Reese's. In the last quarter of the 19th century, the French concept of flaneur went under serious reevaluation. A word meaning stroller or lounger, flaneur was originally a derogatory term towards the lazy, the idle, the loitering, but it gained a shade of romanticism over time. The flaneur became a wandering observer who absorbed urban landscapes like one might absorb a work of art, a shifting theater of crowd against a static stage of architecture. The rise of the flaneur corresponds to the rise of modernity, capitalism, industrialism. The modern city as we know it today was born here, and with it new psychological and sociological influences on the individual. With the rise of modern conveniences, having free time was no longer a luxury, but something totally normal, and being a flaneur was seen as a totally respectable way of using that free time. From the flaneur, we got people watchers and street photographers and sidewalk exhibitionists, but it is important to make the distinction between the flaneur and the tourist. The tourist goes to a place to gawk, to mark off a locale on a checklist, to see all the major landmarks everyone already knows about. It's all surface with a tourist. The flaneur is much more about tiny details, small moments, the normal and the simple, and chronicling it all for its own sake, not for the sake of a vacation. The ideas of the flaneur continued to evolve into the 20th century, which brings us to 1950s France. If you had a time machine and wanted to find young radicals, artists, theorists, and revolutionaries, then mid-20th century France is pretty much an all-you-can-eat buffet. The new group of free thinkers and intellectuals were popping up every 48 minutes, or so the legend goes. Most well known to us stinky Americans was the French new wave of filmmakers and critics who rejected traditional film practices in favor for more naturalistic movies with narrative ambiguity. A more obscure example would be Oulipo, a group of writers and mathematicians who combined their talents to develop new styles of constrained writing. Both groups were about taking our conventional means of looking at art, tossing them out wholesale, and working against the grain to develop something new. Psychogeography is to the flaneur what the new wave was to film and Oulipo was to literature. Psychogeography was originally conceived in 1953 by Ivan Tolstoi in response to an urban status quo. In incredibly simple terms, if you walk a set path for certain places, like say from work to home and back again, then the repetition of the path and the sights surrounding it begin to numb you to the fact that you are existing in a 360-degree world. Taking a new path can have an effect of waking you up from this and making you acutely aware of your surroundings. This is psychogeography, how the act of walking through spaces, especially new spaces, can affect us psychologically. Psychogeography, its definition refined by one Guy Debord, became a popular concept among groups like the Letterist International, and its sequel group, the Situationist International. As Oulipo was trying to write literature through math, imposing one system over another, a popular method among these groups for breaking the urban status quo was to take a map of one city and try to use it to get around another, like getting through Paris through a map of London, forcing your way into back roads and across fields, and simply drifting through spaces that no one drifts through. But where shall we drift to now? Does this have a single thing to do with Animorphs? If you want to explore the relationship between psychogeography and Animorphs, click the map of London. If you just want to stay this course and look at some modern works inspired by psychogeography, then click the map of Paris. Or simply don't click anything. It would be foolish of me to dictate your path. Oh my God, you have no idea. Let's think about this for a second. There's a number of different ways to put a reader character in the Animorphs universe. Probably the most obvious and most boring way would be to just redo old Animorphs books, scene by scene, only inserting the reader character in like Forrest Gump into old news footage. Same o, just with you in it too. A slightly more interesting approach would be to redo those books, but since we are no longer stuck with the point of view of the narrator character, we can show all the stuff that happened, if you'll allow the term, off screen. Just take the first book and imagine all the stuff we never actually got to see because we were stuck with Jake's perspective. The other Animorphs escaping the construction site, Tobias morphing his cat for the first time, Cassie and Rachel experimenting with morphing and discovering how to morph skin-tight clothing, Tobias acquiring his red-tailed hawk morph, Cassie, Rachel, and Tobias escaping the security guards at the gardens, Rachel acquiring her elephant morph, the policeman capturing Cassie, Tobias's final moments before getting stuck in morph. It's still telling the same story, but from the B-reel with the stuff we didn't get to see the first time around, and that would give it a certain value to Animorphs fans, canon or not. Alternamorphs number 1 goes for neither of these options. Instead, they put you as a character in the first book, and then make sure you stay as far away from the Animorphs as possible. You literally sleep through the first half of number 1, The Invasion. You're too involved with having to escape your ferret morph to help with any of the spying during the sharing meeting. Everything the Animorphs learn, you learn secondhand through quick little exposition dumps. You finally get to hang out with them when it comes time to get battle morphs in the gardens. That is, until the security guard shows up. Now, you think this would be a natural place to put a choice, whether you should run with Jake and Margot or with Rachel, Cassie, and Tobias. Nope. Instead, everyone runs away from you, and you find yourself alone again. You get a hyena for a battle morph, alone. You get caught by and escape from some police officers, alone. And you go into the Yerk pool, alone. You don't even use the pool entrance in the school. By complete accident, you manage to stumble onto a completely different entrance and sneak into the pool roughly around the same time as the rest of the Animorphs. Well, at least you get to be involved in the big showdown from the end of the book, right? You scurry behind a storage shed. Quickly, you morph back to human. Rachel pokes her head around the shed. You'd better stay here. You need to gather your strength if you're going to morph again. We'll come back when it's time. Holy shit! This book. The book supposedly designed to give readers the fantasy of fighting alongside the Animorphs literally has Rachel go, hey man, relax. Take a seat and chill for a bit. We'll take care of this. Don't worry, we got it. You did good, sport. Take a load off. This is like going to Star Trek The Experience, and instead of having a simulated Star Trek adventure with Borgs and Klingons and stuff, you just had Riker poke his head through a door and go, listen, everyone, we're a bit busy, so how about y'all head down to Guinan's and mingle while we get this sorted out, okay? Did anybody behind this book know what a fantasy was? Because napping through an adventure isn't one. Number 1, the invasion, is condensed down to only the first half of this book, so Alternamorphs number 1 has a whole other adventure for the Animorphs to ignore you in. Animorphs number 4, the message, is the obvious choice. It was the next must-read book in the series with the introduction of Axe. So naturally they skipped the obvious choice and jumped right into number 11, the Forgotten. Axe is just there because I'm sure nobody wanted to live the fantasy of being a dolphin, exploring the dome ship, and introducing themselves to their new alien friend. Nah, we're just gonna do the juggle thing instead. Except kind of not, because it might be more accurate to say that the second half of Alternamorphs number 1 is actually a sequel to The Forgotten. You're just making dinner with your mom, minding your own business, when bang, zap, zoom, you find yourself time jumping between your house and the South American jungle with the rest of the Animorphs. Why are these time jumps happening? My best guess is that someone behind this book, be they Kay Applegate or a ghostwriter or someone in editing or whatever, decided that the Sario Rip in number 11, The Forgotten, and the Sario Rip in Megamorphs number 2 contradicted each other. See, in Megamorphs number 2, the Sario Rip was closed by a second huge explosion. There is no second huge explosion in The Forgotten. Jake just kind of snaps into his past self and changes time. So without that second explosion, time is unraveling. I think that's what they're implying anyway. It's never really stated. X just gives the usual about how he's too busy ogling girls to pay attention in class. I don't think this is the worst idea in the world. At the very least, it's something a little new instead of just reading an abridged version of an Animorphs book you've already read. And when you and the rest of the Animorphs wind up in the jungle again, everyone actually sticks together. And they defer to your judgment when it comes to morphing for some reason, even though Jake is the only one who actually remembers how this all went down. So yeah, this is automatically better than the first half of the book, but it's also a nasty trick. Anybody who's read The Forgotten probably went into this bit going, okay, I know how it went down originally, so I know what to do and what morphs to pick to make it work. Wrong. Anytime you morph an animal the Animorphs originally morphed in The Forgotten winds up getting you killed. And just like every other time you morph in this book, you otherwise don't have enough information to make a smart decision. One ant morph gets you eaten by a sloth. There are very few things I'd be more embarrassed to be killed by. Here lies the 6th Animorph, utterly destroyed by a butterfly. Visor 3 actually does you a solid here and creates another blast for you, which throws you through time. Flash! You're in the front quad outside school. You're wearing a sweater you haven't worn since last year. Ahead of you is the bus stop. You see Patrolman Teeter directing traffic. He retired last summer. You turn. Rachel is back on the steps of school. Her hair is a good 4 inches shorter. She touches it, frowning. She wore it that way last year. You've gone back in time like you should have, but you've overshot your time. You're a year too early. We're back in 1995! Quick, tell Jenny Jones not to do that gay crush episode. Yeah, I don't know. You're back in your bodies from a year ago, before you all had morphing powers, except you still have morphing powers somehow. Marco's mom is still around, but Visitor 3 is there. Visitor 3 is always there. And he's decided to morph a pit bull to kill you all. I guess he knows you're all humans now, so now you have to morph a giraffe to fight him. Yeah, I don't know what any of this is about. It's just things and other things. But then there's a flash and you're back in the prison. Like, whatever, this book sucks. Do we even want to go on with the second one? I guess, if you want to, go ahead and click its cover. But if you'd rather come over to share a drink and forget this ever happened, click the shot glass. I'll do whichever you want. You know, I think we have something special here, you know? As interesting as it would be to see Catherine Applegate and Michael Grant take a stab at a book format they aren't familiar with, the Alternamorph books are indeed ghostwritten, and Alternamorphs number 1, The First Journey, was ghostwritten by none other than Tanya Alicia Martin. I say none other like you should know who that is, but you probably should, because Martin is the most important person to Animorphs that nobody talks about. She's the editor of Animorphs. By all accounts, she's had some input into every book in the series. The credits for professional editors is a lot harder to track down than that of writers, but I've found her name attached to such wide range of books as Dreadful Sorry, South Beach, A Llama in the Family, and that young adult classic, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, Racism and Sexism in Corporate America, The Myths, the Realities, and the Solutions. None of those credits are for Choose Your Own Adventure books, but again, it's not like I have a complete list of the products she's worked on. A lot of her work for Animorphs is undocumented, though it seems she had a significant hand in selecting ghostwriters. So once again, we find ourselves at the door of speculation. So let's ask a few questions and see what bullshit answers we can pull out of thin air. First off, why was Tanya Alicia Martin given this project? Unless she uses an unknown pen name, Martin hasn't actually written any books herself. Of course, being an editor gives more skill in this regard than you would have just, having no writing ability whatsoever, but it is very possible to be a very effective editor and a shitty author. But Martin may not be a shitty author, this might just be an incredibly poor representation of her work. If we assume that Martin does have much inclination towards writing, then why wasn't this project given to another ghostwriter? Maybe somebody with gamebook experience. I would suggest there's a chance, a possibility, that this first Alternamorphs book was very rushed by Scholastic. It's not really an Animorphs book. It's very clearly a piece of merchandising. The most marketed Animorphs has felt since Megamorphs 2 and its collectible covers. Maybe Scholastic was all, hey, we need a Choose Your Own Adventure Animorphs book in 3 weeks. Let's go, let's go, let's go! And Martin couldn't find anyone with a free schedule, so she slapped this together last minute. Or, that's not at all what happened. I don't know. You guys realize this is how history's put together, right? We take the tiniest slivers of information and come up with motivations and theories that try to bind them together in some kind of narrative. I mean, this book is barely 15 years old. Everyone involved is still alive. And yet the best I can do is pull this fantasy out of my ass. Imagine what people trying to figure out the Roman Empire have to do. There's just nothing solid to glean from any of this, and since the Alternamorph books are such disposable entertainment, it's hard to actually care that much. For the record, the ghostwriter for Alternamorphs number 2, The Next Passage, is Emily Costello, but we'll talk about her when she shows up in the regular series. This path was kind of a putter. If you think we should look at the second Alternamorphs book, click, oh no, the Yeti! The first thing Alternamorphs does differently is that instead of being broken up into pages, it's broken up into chapters. You read a handful of chapters, and when you're given a choice, you are not told to go to a specific page, but to a specific chapter. This has two effects on the books. One is the longer passages gives the books the option to delve into details, have decently length conversations between characters, and they just feel more like regular books. A choose-your-own-adventure book has to cut its story up into tiny chunks, whatever can fit onto one page, boiling it down to a quick series of story beats. This keeps the pace quick, but nobody's going to call a choose-your-own-adventure book high literature. The other effect is that, with so much space devoted to longer chapters, there are fewer choices here than in a normal choose-your-own-adventure book. Alternamorphs number 1 only has 6 choices in the entire book, and since it's basically 2 stories in one book, that's 3 choices per story. Alternamorphs number 2 fares a little better with 9 choices without such an obvious distribution of them, but that still pales in comparison to most game books. Is that actually a detriment, though? Perhaps it can be forgiven if the actual prose presented is entertaining and engaging enough to carry it. Is it entertaining or engaging enough? I don't know. We decided not to go down that path, and you've got to live with your decisions. However, there is a deep, serious problem within this structure, because Alternamorphs number 1, The First Journey, is not a game book. It's not really interactive, and the reason for this is because there are no branching paths. But Greg, you say, sure, 6 choices isn't a whole lot, but by definition that should make it interactive, right? The problem is that these 6 choices are just illusions. There is only one correct option for each of these choices. Choose anything but the correct one and you immediately die. You have to choose between morphing an animal A, B, or C. Choose A or B, you're dead. Choose C, you live. Repeat 6 times. There are no branching paths at all. There is a single narrative with a couple of deleted scenes stitched onto the sides. To better demonstrate this, let's go back to Oulipo and the idea of tree literature. This is an apt phrase because if you try to map out all the choices in a game book, you tend to wind up with a tree-like pattern. Here's some maps some other people made of various choose-your-own-adventure books. You'll note there's a lot of complexity to it. Trees have been used to symbolize increasing complexity and interconnectivity for years. It shows up in all different sorts of cultures and theologies. It's used as a metaphor for the increased complexity of evolution. It is almost always associated with complex beauty. Now here's my attempt at mapping the paths in Alternamorphs number 1. Each path that ends with a B is a bad ending. Each path ending with a G is a good ending. Yeah, it doesn't look quite as healthy. Almost sickeningly uncomplex. This is not tree literature, this is stick literature. The idea of the reader having any agency in this book is an illusion. This book isn't about you becoming a character in Animorphs. This is about some nameless new character showing up in a remake of an old Animorphs book with a couple of extra chapters where you get to see him or her die. It's a normal book that just happens to be in the second person and in present tense. Scholastic really seemed to drop the ball on this one. It's almost as if they had no idea how to do game books. Despite, being the publisher of one of the most popular game book series of all time. How could they have signed off on this shit? Was this a rush job? I don't know, maybe. Maybe they realized how much they botched this on such a basic level, because Alternamorphs number 2, The Next Passage, fares a little bit better. Here's my map of that book, and you can see it's a lot more complex. See, it separates into 2 different paths at one point. And look over here, kind of a mini-split going on. Granted, it leads to 2 different bad endings, but that's still way more complex than the first one had. Of course, Alternamorphs number 2 has its own structural problems. Let's look at the choice that creates the big path split there. What happens here is the Elemist literally puts 2 buttons in front of you, one marked A and the other marked B. You are given no information as to what each button will do. You are clueless. You might as well be tossing a coin. And this is just another way of removing the agency from the reader from the process. If it's just a random choice, then you're not really choosing, are you? None of the other choices are this vague, but this is the most important one. That one that has the greatest effect on the story, and you have no clue as to what it will do. I mean, let's try it out. Click the red button or the blue button. I'm not going to tell you what might happen. Will we continue our discussion of these books? I don't know. Will it lead to something entertaining? I don't know. Just click one. Fuck you, I don't care which one, just click one. Click one, shithead, do it now, go! Game books as tie-in merchandise for established properties were around long before Animorphs was a thing. The majority of them in the 1980s were published under the Find Your Fate line published by Ballantine, with tie-in books for Indiana Jones, James Bond, Doctor Who, G.I. Joe, Gem and the Holograms, Thundercats, and Golden Girl and the Guardians of the Gemstones? Wow, that's an obscure one. I have a couple of books here that Find Your Fate did for Transformers, and dear mother of God, what happened? Oh, it looked like this book was once owned by a bedwetting tar monster. The most significant difference these books have to normal choose-your-own-adventure books is the lack of a you character. There are no self-insert presences here. You simply orchestrate the actions of the Autobots as they respond to whatever dastardly plan the Decepticons have at this time. There's a kind of sense to this. It's the books trying to approximate the ways kids play with Transformers toys, bashing them together in sandboxes and coming up with their own stories. The franchise has a fantastical nature. It's high adventure with crazy cartoon elements. And while this is not a universal truth, it seems that the more fantastical something is, the more likely a child playing make-believe with that franchise will, quote-unquote, transplant themselves into the story instead of simply entering the story. What I mean by that is that a kid is more likely to imagine themselves being Optimus Prime than they are to simply imagine themselves being part of the Transformers universe. Maybe they might imagine themselves as an original Transformer character, but fleshy 7-year-old Billy wouldn't have much to do in the war between the good robots and the bad robots. I mean, I'm sure some kids did, but I just don't feel they would be the likely majority. Same goes for virtually every other franchise under the Find Your Fate line. You're more likely to imagine yourself as Indiana Jones or James Bond or the Doctor or Gem than you are to imagine yourself as yourself, somehow being part of the adventure. So why is it easier for kids to imagine self-insert characters in Animorphs? Well, despite all the aliens and space gods and laser guns and superpowers, Animorphs is far less fantastical than your average Saturday morning cartoon. In fact, part of the point is that on the surface it has all the trappings of a silly Power Rangers wannabe, but is in fact a lot more real, a lot more violent, and a lot more deadly than anything you'd watch in your feety pajamas. There's also a more even ground between you and the characters. The Animorphs are meant to be normal kids like you and me. They aren't super athletic archaeologists or British secret agents or giant robots. They're kids you might find in your own classrooms, just moonlighting as superheroes. And finally, there's more accessible points of entry, with dozens of points in which your self-insert character might enter the story. Of course, that's not universal. I'm sure there are plenty of people who imagine themselves as specific Animorphs characters. But even then, they probably imagine themselves as one character, interacting with the rest of the cast through that character. And that's probably the biggest issue with these Find Your Fate Transformers books. Not that they're in the third person, but that the reader controls the actions of all the Autobots, not one specific character, and that completely removes the reader from the fantasy. It puts you in the role of a director, a story orchestrator, except the book doesn't even give you the tools to do that well. Unlike the limitless possibilities of orchestrating a story with toys in your sandbox or playing make-believe with friends, you are instead limited to whatever options the author comes up with. Gamebooks just do not work that well without a focus on a singular protagonist. Interestingly, both Alternamorph books have a different way of tackling the fantasy of being part of the Animorphs. The first one is a general you character with no existing analog within the main series. It's pretty much a new character from the start. The second Alternamorphs instead puts you in the body of David. They don't go so far as to call him David, and they keep things vague enough in case it's a girl who's reading, but yeah, you're playing David. And the two Alternamorphs are isolated from each other. We all knew they were non-canon from the rest of the Animorphs, but they're not even canon with each other, so instead of being an ongoing series, Alternamorphs is instead a series of jump-on points for the spectrum of people who fantasize about being in Animorphs. Are you the kind of person who imagines themselves as themselves joining the Animorphs? There's an Alternamorphs for that. Are you the kind of person who imagines themselves as a pre-existing character? There's an Alternamorphs for that, too. Are you the kind of person who imagines extremely erotic adventures where Axe has penises for fingers and Marco grows a vagina in the back of his head and Rachel turns into a Willy Wonka blueberry girl? There is an Alternamorphs for that, but it's hidden deep within a secret vault below the Florence Cathedral. Good luck, treasure hunters. Of course, that's how the 80s did tie-in books. In the 90s, however, we got one of the most successful tie-in series ever with Give Yourself Goosebumps. If you'd like to explore that series and how it affected Alternamorphs, then you have my permission to click the Goosebumps logo below. If you think we should expand outward, however, then click the looking glass and we'll explore the place of game books today and where they might go in the future. While I didn't hear the term psychogeography till much later, the first major work influenced by psychogeography I encountered was Alan Moore's 1999 graphic novel, From Hell, his telling of the story of Jack the Ripper. In the fourth chapter, the famous killer takes a tour of London with a coachman, exploring the city through the eyes of its spiritual history, finding patterns in architecture and symbols and the historical people who hovered over them. The coachman, despite the fact that he drives these same streets over and over again, has never noticed these patterns because for him it has become an urban status quo and he had lost sense of his surroundings. The relative term here might be occultist psychogeography. Like one using a map of London to get through Paris, one might also use the history of occult practices to get through London, or maybe a history of Doctor Who filming locations to get through London, or having no fucking clue how to get through London to get through London. I used London as an example because it's where the biggest organizations of psychogeographers are today, even though the idea is French in origin. It is the home of the London Psychogeographical Association and the Workshop of Nonlinear Architecture. Some of the most influential writers on psychogeography who are alive today live or write about London. One of the most influential works of psychogeography is Ian Sinclair's 1975 text, Lud Heat, which explored the relations between 6 churches designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor in London. The Hawksmoor churches would also inspire the 1985 novel Hawksmoor by Peter Ackroyd, which includes a number of references to wanderers. Then there's novelist Will Self, who brings up psychogeography constantly in his work. One of his most talked about walks happened in 2006, when he walked 26 miles to Heathrow Airport, flew to Kennedy Airport, and walked 20 miles to Manhattan. What's perhaps the most significant thing about this walk is that it helps us frame the present state of psychogeography with modern technology. Air travel, along with trains and cars, require no physical labor or the labor of animals in order to move things. This can create a physical illusion for the body, so that while Will Self traveled hundreds of miles that day, he only walked 46, and those are the miles his body actually felt. It's damn near magic if you think about it like that, and it's still a relatively recent development. The steam engine is only a couple hundred years old, if that. While the actual dimensions of our physical world hasn't changed, the methods of traversing those dimensions have changed to such a startling degree that walking, one of the slowest means of transportation and one that requires a lot of physical energy, seems almost to be an act of protest against our modern world.
And in the future, we don't need horses. We have motorized carriages called automobiles.
If everybody's got one of these does anybody walk or run anymore?
Of course we run, but for recreation, for fun.
Run for fun? What the hell kind of fun is that?
And the nature of our world continues to change, with the internet, GPS systems, and cell phones helping us assign routes and buy airfare and keep us connected to an invisible web no matter where we are. We are not just finding ourselves in an urban status quo, but if the works of everyone I just mentioned is any indication, a history and technological status quo. We are bound to the certain normalities of both the present day and our modern technological conveniences. And for that, psychogeography, or whatever else might shake us out of our casual day-to-day existence, is very important. This is not me trying to demonize day jobs or computers or routine, but contrast is a good thing. And there are ideas in everything, every corner and dirt road, every lamppost and street. Oh no, the Yeti! One of the central ideas of psychogeography is that physical objects correspond to certain ideas, and this includes physical space. A bit of geography, a hill, some trees, a house, pavement, a building, street signs, plumbing, parking lots, dirt roads, some bushes. All of it can have a personal significance based on your own knowledge, history, and personality. The way light reflects off a window can create a certain mood. Busy locations might create different emotional responses based on how much you can stand to be around other people. But it can get more specific than that. Say if you're an H.P. Lovecraft fan, for instance, then visiting New England, it's likely that certain locations will evoke those works for you, even if there really aren't any old ones that'll pop your sanity like bubble wrap. That's the relation between art and geography, and yes, it's a very subjective experience. Since not everyone has read the same books and watched the same movies, they don't always agree on the significance of the themes of those works. It'll result in different experiences, and that's perfectly okay, as psychogeography is a very internal experience. So, how might Animorphs affect our perspectives on the world around us? It's not like the H.P. Lovecraft example, where Lovecraft used real along with fictional locations. The city the Animorphs live in does not exist. It gets better refined as the series progresses. We know it's some vague California coastal town, but there is no real-life location with a zoo/theme park, a mall, a Planet Hollywood, a radio telescope, a military base, a beach, mountains, a forest, and only one car wash. Some might say that's part of the point, because if the characters got super specific about their location, they'd be caught by the Yeerks, which makes such meta levels of no sense that I'm not even going to get into it here. That's not really the point. The city is a pure fiction, but what the level of vagueness allows is a world where every city contains some elements of the Animorphs' hometown. Statistically speaking, you probably don't live in a city with a theme park. But statistically speaking, you probably live in a city with a McDonald's. So I ask all you Animorph fans, how many times have you gone to a McDonald's or even just passed one and thought, I'd like a Happy Meal with extra happy, please? That's psychogeography, or at least an aspect of it. It's an idea hidden within a structure brought about from our own experiences. Or as some might put it, all ideas are hidden within things, and it is our perception that filters through these ideas. To walk through a space is to be present during an orchestra of ideas. And Animorphs seems particularly tuned to this way of thinking, as one of the main themes of the series are things that are hidden in plain sight. The Yeerks control people without them seeming outwardly different. They hide their lairs underground and put their entrances in the most mundane places. A school maintenance closet, a fast food kitchen, a mall dressing room, a car wash. The Animorphs use their powers to look like other animals, to hide away as insects, or sniff around as a common dog, or fly around as seagulls. The Chee hide their true nature behind holograms. The Ellimist hides a valley full of Hork-Bajir from visual perception. Alien artifacts are buried in construction sites. Spaceships are cloaked. Bodies are disintegrated. Tiny aliens have ships that look like toys. Even communication is not being done through sound, but through thought. A huge war for the fate of our planet is being fought, but it rarely intersects with our day-to-day lives. The average person in this world doesn't know what's going on until the end of the series. Despite everything that happens in the plot, the urban status quo is maintained, and the fictional urban area in which that status quo is maintained is vague enough that anyone can see reflections of it everywhere they live. For people intimately familiar with the text, like the people who watch my videos, Animorphs floats through our landscapes like ghosts, haunting our malls and schools and suburbia. Who's to say that behind all of this, there isn't a secret war between teenagers and aliens? How would we know? It's a secret. I have some final words, and if you want to hear them, then click the words. I promise it'll lead you to the right video this time. But I also have a fun idea that I'd like to see my viewers participate in. So if you have a camera, video, or picture, or whatever, and you want to work in a collaboration that combines psychogeography and Animorphs, then click the roll of film, and I'll tell you what to do. Alternamorphs number 2, the next passage, is way, way, way better than the first book by a number of ways. First off, instead of playing your fake extreme sports loving self, you are basically quantum leaping into David for this outing, though no one explicitly calls you David. Instead of the book assuming things about you, you are instead taking control of a pre-existing character. It kind of sets an interesting precedent about each of these books taking place when a character gets morphing powers. I'm sure if they did a third one, it would have you playing one of the auxiliaries. Playing as David also gives the reader access to scenes we didn't get to see in the main series, like David finding the morphing cube originally. We get to witness you as him messing around the construction site, venting off steam for being the new kid for the 7 bajillionth time, throwing rocks at a concrete wall until it crumbles, revealing the hidden cube inside. It's the nearest we're going to get to a David narrated book, and for that, at least it has a little value for regular series readers. It also creates a sense of unease with the reader if they're familiar with how the David trilogy played out, knowing that this character is a turncoat, wondering if your choices are going to affect if you become a villain or not. That's an interesting place to put a reader. The nearest comparison I can think of is playing Naked Snake in Metal Gear Solid 3 with the foreknowledge that this character is going to be Big Boss in future continuity. Alas, this book doesn't take advantage of this idea, but at least for the first third of it in your first read-through, you do kind of wonder. So you know how this story goes. You find the blue box, take it home, and try to sell it on mid-1990s Craigslist, only to have the Animorphs and the Yeerks attack your house at the same time to have the craziest fight scene of all time. Visitor 3 demands you hand over the morphing cube, but of course you get to choose. Yes, the first choice in this book is whether or not you hand over the morphing cube. That's another thing this book has over the first one. You get to make choices that aren't just which morph do you use. There's still a few of those, but it's not the majority. You also don't get to dictate what the other Animorphs morph, like in the second half of the first book, which was just weird. Of course, doing what Visitor 3 wants is a bad idea and will turn you and your family to controllers, but at least you had the option. If you're smart, you end up with the Animorphs and are given morphing powers, but before you can do anything else, the world freezes and everyone's favorite omnipotent sugar daddy shows up. I am the Elemist. Are you an alien? You ask. In a manner of speaking. Did you stop everything? You ask. Yes. How? You ask. From your perspective, I am an all-powerful being. Human perspective, however, is extremely limited. You stopped the rain? Yes. You relax a hair. Almost. This Elemist, whatever it is, doesn't seem to mean you any harm. Why? You ask. Because you've angered me! You feel a chill crawl through your body as the sunlight blinks out. You're in total darkness, floating in a featureless void. No up, no down, and the Elemist's voice comes from everywhere at once, and from nowhere. I'm sorry, you stutter. What did I do? You have altered the strands of space-time, and I don't feel like keeping consistent with the voices. Yikes. What jumped up the Elemist's butt? He is seriously pissed off for some reason in a very out-of-character way. And you'd be forgiven in initially thinking this was something that the Krayak or the Drode pretending to be the Elemist would do. But nope, the Elemist is just an asshole in this continuity. And what exactly did you, the Quasi-David, do that altered space-time? Unless he's not really talking to Quasi-David. Unless he's so hateful because he's encountering the one being in the universe that's more powerful than him. The reader. The Elemist can alter the Animorphs universe, but it doesn't exist at all if nobody observes it. And here, the all-powerful reader has a way of getting into the narrative and changing it themselves, directly challenging the supposed omnipotence of the Elemist. We are to the Elemist what Cthulhu is to us, capable of wiping out existence with a shrug, and if some Lovecraftian horror started poking and prodding your reality, you might get a little defensive as well. That, or it's just a horrible character botch. The Elemist then gives you two choices, choice A and choice B, without any details to help you make a choice. He then tells you that if you do poorly, you'll die, because the Elemist is a psychopath now. But hey, at least this book has one branching path, which is more than can be said about the last one. Since there's no way to make an informed decision here, we're not going to make one either. In fact, let's kick it up a notch. Grab a dice and roll it. If you get 1 or 2, click here. If you get 3 or 4, click here. If you get 5 or 6, click here. 2 of these options go to the 2 branching paths presented in the book. One of them is a complete fabrication, my fake review of a part of this book that doesn't exist. Go on. Let fate decide how this review ends.
Because Jägermeister is expensive, okay? Alright, this is just as good. Alright. Anyway, thank you for showing up. I think we're gonna have fun tonight, and it actually kind of means a lot to me that you came. This whole Alternamorphs thing has got me kind of down. It's kind of a crappy Animorphs product to work with. But Megamorphs 4 is next, and that should be fun.
Let's skip for 2.
And
Yes. I'll give you 2. And since you're cute, it's on the house.
I think she's flirting with you.
Oh! It's Axe flirting with a human woman. So, you know what that means. Take a shot. On. We're gonna have fun. Okay, my Swedish chef is better, but yeah, we I could try. Let me get psyched up. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, drink. Throw 'em back till I lose count. I'm going to swing from the chandelier. Now I'm going in the Swedish chef. Berg, bergy, berg, bergy, bergy, berg. No, don't put yourself down like that. I don't know. You are beautiful. Okay, you were so gorgeous or handsome or however you would prefer it, but you are, and I mean that. I mean that from in here. Okay. I just.
Alright, you clicked the option that continues the discussion and not the one that leads to the stupid sketch. Good for you. And now some concluding thoughts on Alternamorphs. I doubt I could ever convince you that Alternamorphs are actually good books. I doubt I could convince myself. But after all of that, I do feel kind of obligated to defend them a bit. Yes, in comparison to game books, they are lacking in the general structure that usually defines them, but it really seems to me that this is an intentional trade-off to focus on actual storytelling. Animorphs is long-form prose, and to have a fantasy about being part of Animorphs means having a fantasy about being part of long-form prose. To cut the stories up like a choose-your-own-adventure book would fracture this fantasy. It's not uncommon for a choose-your-own-adventure book to have so many threads that they contradict each other. There's one choose-your-own-adventure book I owned as a kid called Sandcastle, and there were 2 branching paths in it. In one, you are shrunk down and you have a crazy fantasy adventure with the beings that have moved into your sandcastle, and in the other, these fantasy elements just do not exist. They just don't exist, and you just mess around with some kids on the beach. Both stories were in direct conflict with each other, and they had 2 different messages to give to kids. Someone, be it Kay Applegate, the Ghostwriters, or someone else in Scholastic, had way too much respect for Animorphs as literature to risk an internal conflict like this. Better to keep a tight control on this than let them run amok. And in a way, I can respect that. It's not like Alternamorphs have any obligation to keep to popular game book structure. It's not part of the Choose Your Own Adventure franchise. It's allowed to be its own thing. And for that, I just can't get mad at it. Not seriously mad anyway, maybe goofy internet mad. Alternamorphs is non-canon and has a lot of issues, so if you feel like skipping them, I won't blame you. But they're not a total waste, and for me at least, they're an interesting footnote to the Animorphs experience, and you really shouldn't feel bad if you have them in your collection. I guess that makes this a positive review? I don't know, but thanks for joining me. I can't confess to being in with the cool kids these days, having graduated high school over a decade ago, but are gamebooks still even a thing? Looking through some book lists, it seems the vast majority of gamebooks published today are either parodies or nostalgic throwbacks meant to be read by adults who grew up with Choose Your Own Adventure. Series aimed at kids are a lot harder to find. Was Alternamorphs truly the last of an era? One's first assumption as to why gamebooks are no longer in vogue is due to the rise of narratively driven video games. Maybe, but the experience one gets from video games and that one gets from gamebooks are fairly distinct. In video games, choice is usually just a gameplay feature among a wide variety of gameplay features, and these choices tend not to vary the plot as much as you might get with a gamebook. Take Mass Effect, for example. There are distinct and highly advertised choices you have to make in each game that will affect certain characters and world details, but no matter what you choose, the actual plot stays pretty much the same. Choice in Mass Effect is really the highly advertised sprinkles on a cake made up of over-the-shoulder shooting action, vehicle sections, quick response minigames, resource management, and RPG leveling systems. Gamebooks allow for flexible plots in ways that video games just haven't really replicated yet. Sure, there are open world games, but those aren't— Oh no, the Yeti! Alright, you clicked the option that continues the discussion and not the one that leads to the stupid sketch. Good for you. And now some concluding thoughts on Alternamorphs. I doubt I need to convince you that Alternamorphs are some really shitty books. I know I don't have to convince myself. Holy crap, these are two stinking turds, and it is my obligation, nay, my duty, to express how blindingly awful they are. In comparison to other gamebooks, these two are among the worst. They are a mockery of the gamebook structure that Choose Your Own Adventures helped define. I'd almost call it a parody of Choose Your Own Adventures if I found them the least bit funny. This should never have happened. Animorphs is an established series of long-form prose. Almost every series of game books are a bunch of unrelated one-off adventures. These two things go together like peanut butter and battery acid. Choose Your Own Adventures doesn't have to worry about ongoing characters or plots. It's even allowed to have different paths be in conflict with each other and have it be okay. Animorphs does have to worry about these things, and I think that forced the people behind it to play very timidly about how the reader made choices. Someone, be it Kay Applegate, the Ghostwriters, or someone else in Scholastic, were too chicken shit to cut up their precious Animorphs. But who cares? These books are non-canon. They have no effect on the main series. This is where you're supposed to do the crazy off-the-wall experimental shit. Because they didn't, I'm afraid I lost all my respect for this project. If you're going to advertise yourself as a game book, then you have an obligation to keep to the popular game book structure. For that, I can't help but get mad every time I see these books. Like, seriously mad, not goofy internet mad. Alternamorphs is non-canon and has a lot of issues, so there's no reason not to skip these things. They are a total waste, and for me at least, they're a sad footnote to the Animorphs experience, and you shouldn't feel bad if you've tossed them out of your collection. I guess that makes this a negative review? Yeah, probably. But thanks for joining me. Let's not kid ourselves. If Give Yourself Goosebumps hadn't existed, or hadn't been as successful as it was, then Alternamorphs would never have happened. Despite being very different in terms of content, Goosebumps proved the promotional and structural model that allowed Animorphs to reach its audience and be the second biggest success for Scholastic. The monthly releases, the book club advertising, the merchandising, the spin-off TV show, all of that wouldn't have happened if Goosebumps hadn't paved the way. And the same goes for the tie-in books. And man, Give Yourself Goosebumps really pulled it off. I've seen a healthy sample of people who say that they enjoyed this series more than the main Goosebumps books themselves. And there's always a few people disappointed because during my Goosebumps annual polls, I tend to rule out the Give Yourself series. Because, I mean, can you imagine me trying to pull this gimmicky shit more than once? What's interesting, however, is how little Alternamorphs actually lifts from Give Yourself Goosebumps. Outside of being game books, they're very different structures. They have a very different attitude and a very different relationship with their source material. Part of that probably has to do with the amount of experience each author has. Neither K. Applegate nor the ghostwriters have any gamebook experience, at least no credits that I could find. R.L. Stine, on the other hand, had over a dozen gamebook credits before he started Goosebumps, including a lot of those Find Your Fate books we were just talking about. If you think R.L. Stine never used ghostwriters like he's always insisted, then by the end of Give Yourself Goosebumps, the man would have written 68 gamebook titles. This is a man who knows his craft. The first book in the series, Escape from the Carnival of Horrors, reads like a test lab for all the crazy ideas R.L. Stine had but couldn't implement into his commissioned work. Flipping through the book, the first thing to pop out of you is this wheel. This is supposed to represent a wheel of chance you play in the titular carnival, and the idea is that you close your eyes, point at a random spot, and whatever you land on shows you which page to turn to. You never saw this kind of thing in a choose-your-own-adventure book, at least none of the ones I read. But it doesn't stop there. On top of all the normal decisions you would make in these kind of books, there are several choices that are completely out of your hands. Is it sunny or raining outside? What day of the week is it? You have to do all these weird things like calculate what your weight would be on Mars or do in real-world dexterity tests, making your real-life physical presence a factor in the story. If you encounter a fortune teller, she'll give you 3 numbers which turn out to be a page number that you can use as a get-out-of-jail-free card. The book is constantly breaking the fourth wall and has a snarky sense of humor about it too, mocking cowardly choices and at one point vetoing a choice you make because there's no way for the story to progress that way. And the book has this weird, kind of, but not really in-canon thing going on with the normal Goosebumps series. Things from Goosebumps, like the Doom Slide, Monster Blood, and Slappy, will appear in this book, but both you, the reader, and you, the book character, are aware of the normal Goosebumps books and can use knowledge of those books to get past obstacles. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Escape from the Carnival of Horrors is kind of a messy masterpiece of a game book. The rest of the Give Yourself Goosebumps series is noticeably tamer and more straightforward, choose-your-own-adventure-esque affairs. Probably the biggest letdown in the later books is that they've, instead of bringing characters and artifacts from Goosebumps into the series, you usually just find yourself in a situation where you have to answer a Goosebumps trivia question. Lame. But how does all this compare to Alternamorphs? Poorly. Very, very poorly. Unlike the mad energy in Carnival of Horrors, you never get a feeling that anyone behind these books actually enjoy writing game books. This was probably just a commissioned affair in an attempt to recreate the success of the Goosebumps game books. The first Alternamorphs feels especially lazy. The only choices you get are what animals you morph at given points. Neither of them have especially complex choice paths, even compared to normal vanilla choose-your-own-adventure. I'm not saying they had to have been as twisty and meta as Carnival of Horrors, but they shouldn't induce yawns and become a routine. As for Alternamorphs' relation to the original series, it's different between the two books. The first Alternamorphs doesn't require much knowledge of Animorphs beforehand. In fact, having read Animorphs can be a detriment in the second half of the book, where trying to recreate what happened in the regular series just gets you killed. The second Alternamorphs book is the exact opposite. You pretty much have to recreate 3 different Animorph books choice by choice in order to get the best endings. But at least there's no lame trivia questions. Really, Alternamorphs is just as much a footnote in the history of Goosebumps as it is for Animorphs. Alternamorphs is just a pale, empty imitator of what Give Yourself Goosebumps managed to accomplish, and wouldn't have existed if Scholastic hadn't made bank on R.L. Stine's work. I hate to say it, but Stine, you win this round. It's this combination of vague location descriptions and the secretive nature of the conflict that can allow us to be very receptive to an Animorphs fantasy. It's easily adaptable to the make-believes of young children, where the Yeerkpool could easily be under our feet and an entrance hiding in the playground, and the bird on the power line might be an Animorph scoping the area out, and that really nice teacher might be a robot disguised by a hologram. And for some of us, myself included, it's a fantasy that's very hard to turn off, thanks to the effects of psychogeography. Like the McDonald's example I gave, the mere act of observing anything can cause our brains to make a connection, and therefore your brain might bring up Animorphs in relation to a thing you saw almost by instinct. Which brings us to Alternamorphs, which is basically 2 pre-designed Animorph fantasies built around pre-existing books in the series. But outside of being merchandise, what's the point when literally everything around us can induce our own personalized Animorphs fantasy? It's the same distinction between the flaneur and the tourist. When we are existing in a space and our minds conjure up Animorphs around us, we are being an Animorphs flaneur. When we walk through a pre-packaged narrative built around seeing all the famous landmark moments of the books, we are being an Animorphs tourist. It's the difference between observing Animorphs and gawking at Animorphs. Being a tourist does Animorphs no favors. And now we end this walk. But there are others to be taken. Oh, and watch out for the Yeti. I'm sorry, I should probably explain. I rented this really dangerous metatextual Yeti for a joke, but it seems to have escaped its cage, and never mind. It'll be fine. Effectively, each path tosses you and the rest of the Animorphs into another old Animorphs book, and of course one of them would be number 24, The Suspicion. Alternamorphs number 2 is ghost written by Emily Costello, who not long after this would go on to ghostwrite number 42, The Journey. So you could think of this book as her warming up to her own Helmacron book. And like it or not, but the let's get shrunk by tiny aliens thing is exactly the kind of stupid plot you'd find in a normal choose-your-own-adventure book. So you make your choice, the world unfreezes, and the Animorphs find themselves back in time, or forward in time, since the David trilogy happened before this, and time travel sucks. Anyway, somewhere else in time, in the barn, when the Helmacron ship flies in and starts shooting out the place. And remarkably, this book dares to do something different. Instead of Marco, Cassie, and Tobias getting shrunk, it's the opposite combination. Jake, Rachel, and Axe and yourself are now the size of dust flakes. The Animorphs remember their initial encounter with the Helmacrons, but because of their switched roles, they're basically approaching it fresh. You have the option of either running or surrendering to the Helmacrons, but running will get you caught in a web of another delicious spider. Aren't you a little small for a spider? Have we forgotten the scale of things already? I knew it wouldn't take long. So instead, you listen to Jake and allow yourselves to be captured and brought onto the Helmacron ship. Jake looks at the lock on the door and turns to Axe. Well, Axeman, do you think you can unlock this thing? Axe walks over and studies the panel. Its glowing patterns flicker faster when he touches it, but the door remains closed. This lock responds to DNA. I would be able to override it to recognize me, but there's a problem. What's that? When we shrank, our DNA strands shrank as well. They are too small for the machine to recognize. Well, it's a bunch of sci-fi garble, but at least the Animorphs are acknowledging DNA is a physical thing and not just some abstract magic potion ingredient or whatever. So we replay the bit of the Helmacron ship chasing Visor 3 in his limo, just, not as well written, believe it or not. You can either morph a male or female Helmacron to use the locks and escape, But morphing a female sets off the alarms because all the female Helmacrons are on record, while the male Helmacrons are considered too unimportant to file. Instead of crashing in the gardens, you wind up crashing in the old construction site, getting chased around pipes and bits of concrete, and then you get the chance to morph a normal-sized animal, either a seagull or a rat. Trying to acquire the seagull will just get you eaten, but morphing the rat has its own problems. Namely, that you're David, morphing a rat in the construction site, around pipes. That's when the Drode shows up. No, not to admit that he was pretending to be the Ellimist the entire time. The Ellimist is just the Ellimist and an asshole. No, instead the Drode shows up and shows you what happened to in-canon David, how the Animorphs trapped him in morph and left him to die on an island. Of course, the Drode leaves out the bit where David was an awful murderer who tossed bodies down elevator shafts. You try to shake the Drode off and try to fight the Helmacrons as a rat, but you wind up in a pipe with both ends covered in dirt. The Drode tells you, hey, if you just stay here and let the Helmacrons kill the Animorphs, he'll get you out. The only way you can save them is to demorph anyway, and demorphing in a closed space like this will kill you. If you choose to stay in the pipe, you hear the battle outside wage on, and then the sound dies, and you're unsure exactly what happened to the Animorphs. But all magical beings in Animorph gamebooks are dickheads, so the Drode does not release you from the pipe, and you get trapped in Ratmorph, slowly dying of asphyxiation. Shit, that's harsh. If you try to save them, you demorph, exploding out of the pipe, burying the Helmacrons in dirt and saving the Animorphs, but not without your lower half being crushed in the pipe and you looking like you've been squeezed out of a toothpaste tube. As you're dying, you see the Krayak in front of you, only for him to be effectively bitch-smacked by the Ellimist. I think All Dogs Go to Heaven had the same ending. So you've proven yourself to the Ellimist, and he returned you to where he left you, alive, and hold on a minute! When you demorphed from rat, you should have gone back to a shrunk human, but instead you go to a full-size human. It's not like the Drode went, I am removing the shrinking curse off you, so be careful demorphing, snicker snicker. They just flat out forgot how morphing while shrunk works. Jeez, and I'm starting to defend this book. Seriously though, while Alternamorphs number 2 is a lot better than the first one, I still wouldn't call it a good book. It gets so much wrong with continuity, characterization, and concepts that it's just gonna piss off Animorphs fans, despite being marketed to them as a way to play out your Animorphs fantasy. It has its moments, it has a few interesting ideas, but Alternamorphs are entirely skippable, and you probably should skip them. That's how they fare as Animorph books, but how do they fare as Choose Your Own Adventure books? Well, I'm afraid you picked the wrong path to talk about that. You gotta live with your decisions, folks. For now, that's... Since Animorphs, thanks to its nature, can be wrung out of pretty much everything, then I propose a collaborative project. Show me where Animorphs is hidden in your hometown. I know this is a long shot, since this is hiding in an unlisted video, hidden in one path that not everyone may take, but I want to do this anyway. Go around your hometown and film or photograph places that remind you of Animorphs. Maybe you have a community center that feels like it would be a great home for the sharing, or there's a barn on the outskirts that looks exactly how you imagined Cassie's barn to look like. Add some audio or text commentary over it, send it my way, and once I get enough submissions, I'll edit them together and put a resulting video on YouTube. There's no deadline for this. It ends once I get enough content to make a decent length video out of. You can message me a link through YouTube or email it to me at gregmcduck84@yahoo.com. Yes, I still use Yahoo. I think this could turn out really neat. Or nobody will do it. I'm ready to accept that as a possibility, but I hope people do. I swear, this will be awesome if it happens. I swear. I swear. Effectively, each path tosses you and the rest of the Animorphs into another old Animorphs book, and of course one of them would be number 26, The Attack. Not only one of the most popular books of the series, but the weird Lego Planet of Alien Salesman thing is exactly the kind of stupid plot you find in a normal Choose Your Own Adventure book. So you make your choice, and you and the rest of the Animorphs are flung to the world of the Iskrut, where the Ellimist informs you that you're going to have a rematch with the Howlers. Rematch implying that there was a first match, but the events of number 26, The Attack, took place after the David trilogy, so you were actually gone forward in time, except the Elemist makes a point of removing the memories of these events from the rest of the Animorphs, so it's really the past, but not, and time travel sucks. What's neat is that the Elemist allows you a starting package of morphs. You can either pick Andalite Shark and Komodo Dragon, or Fly, Hawk, and Hork-Bajir. This is definitely a sales pitch meant to separate the readers who make knee-jerk fan reactions and those who use their knowledge of the book strategically. You're either, oh man, I want to be an Andalite, and a shark is so cool, and nobody has a Komodo Dragon morph, I bet that would be neat. Or you're a shark morph, but there's no large bodies of water on this planet. When would I ever use a shark morph? Flying and climbing morphs are far more effective on this terrain. The strategic package is the way to go, but this book proves itself a bit more flexible than the last one in these decisions. In the last book, when you made the wrong decision, you died immediately. This time, you sometimes get to make an additional choice after making the wrong one. You die regardless, but it varies things up a bit. Things play out like they did in the book. The first encounter with the Howler ends in a draw, you make a run for it and stay the night. Eric's there, but whatever. The Howler floods the room with insecticide and you'll escape, but finally something different happens. Cassie gets shot down and killed. Oh no! Everyone is mortified, and Rachel takes it super personally, and, well, you remember in the first Alternamorphs when there was that scene where Rachel tells you to sit down and not actually help the Animorphs in any way? Well, this book takes that scene to the extreme. This is all your fault, she says quietly. Marco is also demorphed and watches silently from a few feet away. Rachel, Axe says, we are all sad. Blaming one another will not help. Rachel's eyes are locked onto yours, blazing with anger. My fault, you ask meekly. You got Cassie killed, she says. Rachel, Marco tries, but Rachel doesn't back off. She's right in your face. I want you to promise me something, she says. What? You ask. That you'll stay out of the way from now on, Rachel says. I don't want you getting anyone else killed. You're then given the option to promise to stay out of the way or not. And if you go, no, I'd still like to actually be part of the adventure, if that's okay. I bought this book and all. Then the Animorphs wait till the middle of the night, then wake you up suddenly, tell you to morph to fly, then trap you for 2 hours until you're stuck in fly morph. Jesus Christ, that escalated quickly. The original David had to threaten the Animorphs, assault them, and throw a corpse down an elevator shaft before they trapped him in morph. Here you're just, I'm sorry about what happened to Cassie, but you can't expect me to do nothing when we're in danger. And they basically murder you for it. Yes, you too can live out your fantasy of being killed by the Animorphs. The correct option is to agree to do nothing. So you do nothing, and the rest of the story plays out without your involvement. They put new memories into the Howlers, and the Krayak is forced to wipe them out. The Elemist returns you home, and because of the good work you did, well, with you not doing anything and letting the real Animorphs do the work, the Elemist offers to save one person of your choice, either your mother or your father. You don't actually get to choose, though, because you/David decides to be all altruistic and stuff and wishes Cassie back to life. Thanks, new kid. We'll still kill you if you do anything, though. Seriously, though, while Alternamorphs number 2 is a lot better than the first one, I still wouldn't call it a good book. It gets so much wrong with continuity, characterization, and concepts that's just going to piss off Animorphs fans despite it being marketed to them as a way to play out your own Animorphs fantasy. It has its moments, has a few interesting ideas, but Alternamorphs is entirely skippable, and you probably should. That's how they fare as Animorph books, but how did they fare as Choose Your Own Adventure books? Well, I'm afraid you picked the wrong path to talk about that. You gotta live with your decisions, folks. For now, that's...
Be sure to check out my book, The Digital Matte Painting Handbook, available from Cybex Books.
The alien invasion has begun, and it's up to the 5 of us to stop them. Animorphs, Transformers! The evil Visser 3 is leader of the Yerks.
He can morph from evil Anzelites
to Inferno Creature
with grasping claws
and firing jaws. But we can change too, into any animal we touch. And when Heroic Axe changes into a scorpion, Visser 3 is gonna get stung.
To save the human race, we pounce like animals.
Make the change. Animorphs.
Each sold separately.
Effectively, each path tosses you and the rest of the Animorphs into another old Animorphs book. And, of course, one of them would be Megamorphs 2 and the Time of Dinosaurs. It's the only in-canon book to match the pure merchandise-driven sales of the Alternamorph books, and I guess the universe hates me. Besides, the go back in time and meet the dinosaurs and aliens thing is exactly the kind of stupid plot you find in a normal choose-your-own-adventure book. So you make your choice, and you're flung deep into the past, in the time of dinosaurs. Right away you have a run-in with a T-Rex and have to decide between a cockroach and a wolf-morph. Wolves turn out to be tastier. You finally catch up with the rest of the Animorphs, and they act like this is the first time this has happened to them, despite Megamorphs number 2 taking place before the David trilogy, except now I guess it takes place after, and time travel sucks. Megamorphs number 2 sucks. Everything sucks. Why are we here? Anyway, you regroup that night, only for there to be another T-Rex attack, only this time you end up swallowed by the T-Rex. Not chewed, just up and swallowed. You're being swallowed! A bigger opening, liquid all around. Water? No, no, no! Too hot to be water! Digestive acid. You're being digested. You are blind, deaf except for a sound of churning, and the steady bass drum of a heart beating. You grin up against warm flesh, up against something that feels like bones. T-Rex's last snack? You're holding your breath. You don't want to breathe in the battery acid T-Rex has in its stomach. A lot of Vor fans are getting erections right now. Look, I respect your personal fetishes, but please keep your pants on during my reviews, okay? Okay. While you're inside the stomach, the T-Rex and Jake play out that bit from Megamorphs number 2 where Jake morphs inside its mouth and kills it, allowing you to crawl out and cockroach morph. Wow, what an adventure! I've got to say, it's fitting that the Megamorphs number 2 path is the lamest. So you walk around a bit until you find the Makora city nestled in the canyon. You're given 2 options. You can investigate, or you can choose to ignore it. For some reason, I find this to be the most hilarious choice in the entire book. The book assumes readers are so disengaged with what's going on that, given the choice, they might choose to ignore the plot. I don't know if that's a diss on Alternamorphs or Megamorphs number 2. If you choose to ignore it, you just wind up eaten by those dinosaurs everyone incorrectly calls velociraptors. If you decide to investigate, you barely walk 10 feet before the elements whisk you away. Why? Because you have shown curiosity, I think. The Elemist takes you to an IMAX theater and shows you a sped-up version of the history of the human race, I guess because humans are really good at being curious. I honestly don't know what this is about. It's like a really shitty version of a Doctor Who humanity speech, and some of those are pretty shitty already. The Elemist then says you passed the test, whatever test that was, and you find yourself back in time, or forward in time, but back in time, back to when you were just moving into town before discovering the morphing cube. The book leaves you hanging. Do you decide to relive events and reclaim the morphing cube? Of course you wouldn't, dumbass. The asshole god guy will just throw your ass in front of a T-Rex again. Seriously, though, while Alternamorphs number 2 is a lot better than the first one, I still wouldn't call it a good book. It just gets so much wrong with continuity, characterization, and concepts that's just gonna piss off Animorphs fans, despite it being marketed to them as a way to play out your own Animorphs fantasy. It has its moments, it has a few interesting ideas, but Alternamorphs is entirely skippable, and you probably should. That's how they fare as Animorphs books, but how did they fare as choose-your-own-adventure books? Well, I'm afraid you picked the wrong path to talk about that. You gotta live with your decisions, folks. For now, that's